Welcome to the Recruiting Stories podcast, where we celebrate recruiting by exploring the stories of leaders and top performers by digging into their stories and understanding how recruiting has impacted their journey and their success. All right, everybody, welcome to the Recruiting Stories podcast powered by Cover 3 Consulting. Today, our guest is Lindsey Trent. She's the president of Next Generation in Trucking Association. Welcome, Lindsey.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to have Lindsey on because we both share a common interest in both the transportation industry and then recruiting the next generation of talent into the transportation and trucking industry. Lindsey, for those who don't know, what is the Next Generation in Trucking Association?
Well, so our organization, and maybe I should tell a little bit about my backstory,
Sure. Yeah.
is I've been in trucking 12 years and I started off doing driver staffing. And so I opened up a branch in Louisville, Kentucky, where I reside. I knew nothing about the trucking industry, like zero knowledge, but this job looked interesting. And I went through this entire interview process. I got the job. I fell in love because the people are amazing. It's very cool. You hit every industry because everybody needs trucks, right? Everybody needs drivers. And so that I just loved being in a different industry, like food distributor or granite or car parts, right? I loved that we hit every industry. And so I did that. But every conversation we had was about the driver shortage. I'd go into a company and they're like, we need 20 drivers today. And the workforce was aging. And we talked about the problem constantly, but there never seemed to be a cohesive solution to solve the problem. And then I went and worked for Ryder, and I worked for Ryder for 4 years. And we also, continued to hire drivers at Ryder, but we also needed diesel technicians. And so throughout that time, I served on the board of the Kentucky Trucking Association. We helped a community college start their CDL program in the state. I helped my local high school start their diesel tech program. And so really getting interested in education and what we can do really to impact our industry by forming school programs. And that's when I was at a conference and somebody introduced me to a guy by the name of Dave Dine, who started a high school trucking program. This is the 7th year teaching it at Patterson High School. And I'm like, there's an answer right there. Trying to create training programs in high schools to reach young people and get them trained and credentialed in the trucking industry. And that's really awesome. How we got our start. And that's what we're doing.
That's so cool. I think of like when I was in high school, there was like low tech programs or whatever they're called today. And I remember like welding and that was it. Like I can't remember what else there were, but it makes all the sense in the world. I love that you drive kind of right into your story. Let's go back. I want to go back to where you started in transportation, right? So you were driver staffing organization. And so you were working with companies to help them staff and find drivers. How'd you get into that? Was it like you knew a friend or someone recruited you, or you just thought it looked awesome? How did that happen?
Well, so the job was on LinkedIn and I just thought it sounded interesting and I applied for it. And I, went through this entire interview process. I'm from Indianapolis originally, and the company was headquartered out of Indianapolis. And so I, just doing the interview process and then falling in love with trucking.
That's super cool. What was it that was so interesting about it, right? Because I think we were kind of joking offline, like most people don't like go in like, oh man, I want to be in logistics. I want to be in trucking, because probably we didn't have a ton of exposure to all the different facets or opportunities within it. I know for me, that was the case. Like logistics sounded boring when I first heard about it because I knew nothing about it.
Yeah.
So what was it about it that was so appealing to you as you got into it?
Yeah, that's really interesting because my first job out of college, I sold wine and spirits to
Mhm,
high-end restaurants downtown Chicago.
mhm.
And that to any 22-year-old is a sexy job and it's pretty cool, right? You're going to fancy restaurants, you're eating and drinking great wine. Um, and trucking is not that sexy. But then if you think about it, it's really cool. I mean,
Yeah,
you got these awesome trucks. If you see the technology under the hood or inside the cab, I mean, it's cool. And so now when I see a truck, when I talk to a driver, I'm just like, you're awesome. Especially when I talk to female drivers. I
right,
love them. I mean, they're cool, right? Like they are I don't want to say those words, but they're just awesome out there on the road. And
yeah,
so I look at them and I'm like, this is a cool industry.
yeah,
And it might not be sexy like selling wine to high-end restaurants, but it's a great industry and it serves a really big purpose. Everything I can see in this room was brought to
right.
me on a truck, right? So it's important.
Yeah. No, I love that because there is purpose behind it that's really tangible. It's
Mhm.
easy to connect and easy to see the need for it, and it's not going away. I always kind of joke when I talk with people about it, like it's not going away until somebody invents a teleporter, right? There's just different ways to move it. But,
Yeah.
as of now, there's truck, train, airplane, rail. That's it, and so much is moved on a truck, especially in that middle and final mile. And so it sounds like for you, it was this realization of like, hey, there's purpose behind this. It actually is a lot cooler industry than I think it
Mhm.
gets credit for. And there's so many, it's so broad, right? Like there's different niches within the industry, whether it's the technology, whether it's the trucking side, whether it's, um, gosh, there's the warehousing and distribution. There's so many different pieces and sectors. So I love that. Okay, so you spent time with Ryder, right? With a big group there, and then from there you went and started Next Generation in trucking. Was that for you? Hey, this is a passion project that's been going on in my mind for you know a decade, for a few years, or was it just like an aha moment? When did it hit you that this is the solution that I need to start?
Really, when I was introduced to Dave from Patterson High School, and then I started learning about education,
Mhm,
I learned that all the other industries, right? You said welding. So
mhm,
welding is a big career technical education program in high schools. I learned that woodworking, construction, cosmetology, culinary, they're all in high schools across the country. And they're training people to get skills to go and be work ready right at graduation. But then when I started finding trucking programs, supply chain, diesel mechanics, right? There's a ton of auto mechanics,
mhm,
but there's just a handful of diesel compared to auto. Our numbers were really low, but we have an awesome industry and young people need to know about our industry. They need to get skilled so we can provide them good opportunities for good jobs. The other great thing about trucking is it's in rural and in urban
right.
settings.
Yeah.
So people are trying to keep young people in their communities. Trucking's a way to do it.
Mhm,
And so getting in this whole education space, I just have grown passionate about trying to help bridge the gap between industry and education and helping to see the trucking industry that when you're getting involved in your local community and your local school, it's not only helping your workforce, but it's really investing in a young person's life and potentially changing their life, potentially giving them a living that they can support a family on and that they can have a good life. And so we
mhm.
need to be out there promoting our jobs and letting young people know that we have a good career field, a good career path where many people start off as a driver and they become the director of safety or an HR manager, or they own their own fleet of trucks. We've got to be out there sharing our message, and that's how we grew Next Gen and became passionate about it.
I love the idea of like changing the mindset around and really promoting it um, as just a possible option, right? I think you know obviously in trucking and in my world, I think transportation in general, like it is not it is not an option that many high schoolers think about. Like I go back to when I was in high school and I'm like, you know, one, I knew nothing about business in general, but like in my brain, I was like, you could be a teacher, you could be a lawyer, you could do business. I had no idea what business was outside of like
Yeah,
what
same.
I see on the side of the road,
Yeah.
McDonald's and Walmart, right?
Hmm.
And then my dad was a pastor, so I was like, well, there's like ministry. So those were what I thought were my options.
Hmm.
And so to introduce the idea of like, here is a, trillion-dollar industry
Yeah.
where there is a wide amount of opportunities. And, I tell young people when I talk to them all the time, like, if you get a tiny bit of $1 trillion, it doesn't take a ton for you to make a really good living for a long time,
Hmm.
on a annual basis. And so there's just so much opportunity there. And so to change that perception and to create awareness is vastly important. What do you find are the challenges to one, I think getting into schools, right? Because you go and promote to schools to create those school programs. What are the
Hmm.
challenges you face both with the school and then with the students?
Okay, so the school, we really are finding a lot of interest with schools because of COVID. They've heard about the supply chain. They see what happens when trucks stop. And so schools are very interested in providing good quality education for their students. And so since our inception, we've met with almost 300 high schools that are interested in starting trucking programs. The challenge is funding. There is something called Perkins funding. It's $1.3 billion a year that goes to career technical education. Um, we we need more programs to get more funding to go to our industry, right? With
Mhm.
if automotive has 1,400 programs and diesel has 200, well, the money is going to the auto, right?
Right.
And so funding is a challenge, but it's out there. It's state funding, private grants, federal. And then with students, it's a matter of, when a program starts, usually the floodgates don't open. It takes time. Word of mouth starts to happen, but you have to go out there and promote the program that you're starting. And we find in rural communities, there might be just the floodgates where tons of students want to do it. But then more other communities, it's not as much. So you really have to promote what you're doing and get them excited about it. And of course, the challenge where you have to be 21 to drive interstate is also something that's challenging, even
Mhm.
though that there's some ways that they can get into trucking at 18 and drive.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah, um I can see there being different challenges depending on like the region that you're in.
Mhm.
Whether it's you said both an opportunity because trucking and transportation happens in rural communities, it happens in cities, but probably the perception is different in each of those places. Where do you see like a big opportunity to dive in? Is there any specific geographic region or sector where you think that next generation of trucking can help solve problems or provide a solution better than the general United States?
Well, so we're working with schools all across the country, and we've got trucking programs that are starting all over. We definitely see a lot of activity in the state of California, state of Washington. Sometimes what happens is one school will start a program and then they tell other teachers about it or other administrators, and then it starts to snowball and more
Yeah.
programs will start because educators talk and
Hmm.
they talk across their state. But in other states that we really want to get into are, the bigger states,
Right.
Texas,
Yep.
those states where there's huge needs. But really every state, because
Yep.
we want to help these young people get credentialed and skilled to go into a great industry.
Yeah. And this might be an unfair question. I didn't prepare or ask, but like thinking it through, like it makes sense to me, especially for young people, because you can make really great money as a driver early on. Had you happened to know what someone like the average, driver could make in their first year? Do you have any?
So, I mean, that's a great question. I met a teacher at Skills USA this past summer, and he had a student that had graduated the year before. So he was 19.
Mhm.
He was a dairy hauler up in Wisconsin, and he made
Mhm.
over $100,000 his first year.
Yeah, right.
They can make good money. I mean, they're working hard,
Right.
but they're making money.
Well, and that's why I ask, like it's my guess was somewhere between 60 and 100 if you're working
Mhm.
hard, right? I mean, if you're doing 40 plus, hours, and I know you're doing miles as a driver, but like um my assumption would be you could make a good amount of money. And the thought for me is just like it seems like a no-brainer because for so many kids, you have the option of going into college, and there's nothing wrong with college. College is a great opportunity. I went to college, but for many students, you're going in with debt or coming out with debt, so to speak.
Mhm.
So if you could go and begin to immediately making that kind of money, that's a game changer. You can build up a great start for yourself in life without saddling yourself with debt or doing it, doing education as you go. And I just think that would be a mindset shift that if
Mhm.
young people made, you could set yourself up for the long haul really, really well. But it's
We also
different.
have some students that they go and take this class and then they work their way through college.
Mhm.
But because of it, they've fallen in love with transportation. And so they go into the supply chain
Yeah.
and they want to work in the trucking industry, but just it will look different.
Yep. And I think it would be an advantage too if you, even if it's, hey, I'm going to go drive for a couple of years, then maybe I want to jump into the supply chain or transportation technology or something like that. What could better prepare you from saying, I've actually had boots on the ground. I've actually loaded a trailer. I've actually, had boots on the dock. Like
Mhm.
you can speak to the problems that most people cannot, especially I think of the brokerage side of things. A lot of kids going into college they've never been on a dock, right? They've never been in a truck. And if you've driven a truck, you're going to be able to answer questions and empathize with people that you're working with far greater than somebody who's never done it. So
Right.
that's great.
Absolutely.
Okay, thinking this through for me, like for all of us in transportation, I think this is a no-brainer to get involved with or to support, right? Because I think we all see the need. How can um, whether you work at a brokerage or you work at a freight forwarder or you work at a transportation technology company, you work at a trucking company, what would be ways we can say, hey, this is a cool idea. How do we support Lindsey and then the next generation of trucking association? What are ways to do that?
Yeah, so people can join our association. Even individuals and companies can help support our mission. We're a nonprofit, and so we're really funded by the industry. And with those funds, we work on the mission every day. But if you want to get involved in your community, a lot of times your school will have career fairs and going and talking to students about your jobs that you have available. Most students will end up working for a company that they have heard about, that they know. And so branding your company out there as a possibility is something that's very important. So getting involved with your school, your local school, it's not as hard as you think. You just have to have the right conversations and find out when opportunities are there. We're working with a lot of state trucking associations that are really pushing the mission and going out there with their states to go to schools and promote at the state FFA and promote at the state career technical education conferences. And so really pushing the trucking industry, the narrative and influencing influencers in education is really important because they're the ones that are going to be telling students about the careers.
Yeah, absolutely. A constant involvement is key, right? Being present and showing up and just creating a presence that says, hey, this is an opportunity. This is something that you should look at, and pointing back to that. You guys have resources for people to look at your website or things like
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. And so our website's nextgentrucking.org. You can also connect with me on all socials. You connect with us on all socials. You can find us at Next Gen Truckers. We have a careers in trucking classroom presentation with videos. We have handouts. We have marketing tools. So feel free to reach out to us because and another thing that your listeners can do, if they have a school that might be a good fit to start a supply chain program or to start a CDL professional driving program or to start a diesel mechanic program, reach out to us. We meet with schools every single day about starting these programs and what they can do and how they can do it. And we're currently trying to get funding to help schools get these programs started.
Yeah, cool. That's awesome. That's super helpful. I want to ask you a few questions that can work towards wrapping up here. Some I typically ask, but on the recruiting front, I want to go back to that, right? Because that's a world that you lived in for a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. Do you have a recruiting philosophy? Because to me, it's been a part of your life. It seems like, ever since you've been in transportation, whether it's driver staffing, whether you were recruiting Dave to say, hey, let's start this thing, or he was recruiting you, vice versa, right? Or now you're recruiting, schools and people to be involved with this. Do you have a philosophy there?
So, my philosophy now and what we do is a lot of listening first. Mm-hmm. When I talk to a student, what do you want to do with your life? What are your gifts and talents? And I might be at a career fair, like in my community, we have a career fair at our Career Tech Ed Center. And I'm talking to students and they're like, well, I think I want to be an engineer. And I say, do you know that you could work on a truck and be an engineer? And they are kind of floored that the supply chain has lots of data analysts that work for them. So really trying to talk to students, talk to people, talk to schools and see what's a good fit for them. And just listening to people's stories.
That's good. Listen first. Seek first to understand. I've heard that before, so that's good. And I agree with that point too. It's something when I talk with young people too, they always typically seem to have an idea of what they want, and that's great. One of them I think of a lot that's popular, and as it should be, is like technology. Like I'm really interested in tech. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, there's a lot of technology in transportation. You ever thought about the technology that goes into telematics in trucking, right? Or the technology that a freight broker may have to use. And so you think about the different pieces there, and suddenly they're like, yeah, I just never knew that was a technology. Just like I didn't know what kind of businesses were out there besides Walmart and McDonald's and stuff like that, because nobody ever told me. Right. And so it's evangelizing and listening, and I think that's great. What about books? I'm a reader. I love to read. They've been influential in my life. Are there any books along the way that have been helpful for you that you would share with the audience?
So I mean, the classic books in business, like Made to Stick, Good to Great, True North, different sales books. Those are the types of books that I love to read and listen to. I also love to listen to, like I'm in a monthly book club and I like true crime books. So nice. I like to, read books for pleasure.
What's your nonfiction? What's your favorite?
Well, I just read Lessons in Chemistry and it was a great book. So things like that are fun. It kind of can take you out of the work mode for a little bit.
I can agree with that. Sometimes I'm trying to think. There was a podcast. It's like a murder mystery podcast at one point that I was super into. And I'm blanking on the name of it now.
I listened to them all.
Yeah, it was really great because that's not my world at all. I'm typically self-help business types of things. Mm-hmm. And I think it was actually a true crime type of a situation. Mm-hmm. But it was such a good story that I was like, man, I could listen. I did. I binge listened to the whole thing.
Yeah. And just think, if you're a professional driver, you're driving on the road and you can listen to podcasts all day long.
100%. That's good. Well, I'll put those in the show notes if that's okay with you. I always think it's good to say, hey, what is other people listening to, and what could be helpful? What about this? Talking about the next generation in trucking. What advice would you have given to your 20-year-old self on your career and just to have success and perspective based off of where you are today?
Gosh, that's really interesting. I think maybe I'm a little bit of an intensive person, and so not to take myself too seriously. I always was serious about my job and career, and would sometimes, have anxiety over that, and just enjoy life, enjoy the ride. And I have to tell that to myself now, because I can work a lot and I have a family. And so I have to remember, hey, the most important thing is my family.
Mhm.
And I've got to make sure it's okay. Things are going to be taken care of. We're doing what's right. And I also have to make sure that the people that I love are taken care of. And so I think that would be the advice. But I don't think I would change much. I mean, I had an interesting path to get me where I am today. But it was all good.
That's cool. I can certainly relate and second the prioritizing. It's really easy to get busy and to get focused or stressed on something and feel like it's the most important thing in the world. But I think it's good to get brought back to center a lot of times and say, okay, these are the things that matter the most, and how am I prioritizing, my time and my energy. So
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Cool. Well, okay, real quick. You mentioned earlier kind of websites and different resources. If people want to get in touch with you, what are the best ways to do that?
So connect with me on LinkedIn, Lindsey Trent, or you can email me, lindsey@nextgentrucking.org. And my name's spelled Lindsey.
Lindsey with an E. I assume that's
Lindsey with an
probably
E.
something.
That's right. Yep. Yeah. Or, check us out on our website, and we love to connect with people and really share the mission.
Absolutely. Lindsey, I really enjoyed talking with you. We'll have you on again sometime down the road, and I appreciate you making some time.
Wonderful. It's great to talk to you too.
Thanks for listening to the Recruiting Stories podcast. If you haven't yet, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Check us out on LinkedIn, Adrian Chapman, and Cover 3 Consulting is our company page. Also check out our website, www.cov3consulting.com. Again, thanks for joining us, and we just simply want to remind you that you can change the world by putting people in a position where they can do the most good, and you do that by recruiting. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next time.